Welcome to this special edition of the hashtag Let's Get Louder LMFs podcast. Whether you're watching right now on YouTube or you're streaming it on your favorite podcasting platform, I am the loud Miami fan. You can call me LMF Chase Blake. This is a special edition of the LMF podcast. It's breaking news. It must be recorded, and I must get my opinion out there, as it was announced late last night that Eury Perez, the Marlins' number one pitching prospect, even though he's not a prospect anymore, might be out for the full 2024 season with a potential elbow issue. He is going to go see Sandy Alcantara's doctor. And this really ends the Marlins' 2024 planned campaign before it begins, as we have just 11 days now left in spring training 2024. Going into spring, you've heard me say on this podcast, you've heard me say it with the Fish on First team. You've heard me say it with the Locked On Marlins team of Peter Pratt when I guest star on his episode. The backbone of the Marlins season, the backbone of this Marlins franchise is their pitching depth. Sandy Alcantara already went down. Eury Perez was supposed to make up with his incredible curve and his masterful changeup and his fastball. We're supposed to make up for the innings that Sandy Alcantara would have missed, along with other pitchers who we will get into. You see some new features here. If you're watching live, I actually paid subscribed to StreamYard. So now I have the Let's Get Louder LMFs podcast logo, and you have some additional banners at the bottom. So if you're not watching on the YouTube, please go to the YouTube channel, hashtag Let's Get Louder. LMF's podcast, subscribe, and you'll actually see additional features to this. But the breaking news again, Eury Perez potentially out for the season. There's no doubt now he's going to start at least on the IL to start the season, as they were ramping him up. And he's come out of the last two games with a nail injury. One of his fingernails was like falling off, or they put a prosthetic on or something to that effect. And he left the last two starts, one after 3.1 innings, the other after, I think, just like 17, 18 pitches, maybe even less. So really, Eury Perez, going into the season, they weren't going to shut him down again like they did last. They were actually going to let him throw a full season this year, not shutting him down, not play, start, stop, play, stop, like they did with Kimming's tenure last year. Just want to throw that out there. Could that have an effect on what's happening now? But we were supposed to get a full year, at least 150 innings to ramp him up to of Eury Perez, where last year he was at the 120 mark. Give him that extra 30 innings, which could have made the extra starts. But right now, that's all been put on pause, maybe even stopped at a red light, and that light's not changing right now, as Eury Perez is now injured, as reported yesterday night, of course, by Craig Mish. Got to give him the shout for the reporting there, and Nightingale as well had it on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call that, where you can actually follow me at Loud Miami Fan. Crazy to think that at the start of this season, that Eury Perez was a big name in there. You had Jesus Luzardo as your number one. Who would be the number two with Sandy out? Jesus Luzardo starting opening day. You figured Eury Perez would be the number two. You'd have Eddie Cabrera as a number 4, potentially. You have Trevor Rogers coming back. And Braxton Garrett, of course, who had a great season last year, a breakout season for him. He also came into camp with a tight shoulder. The Fish on First team, Noah Berger, has reported that tomorrow he will get a live BP session in. That will kind of start the process of him entering games. He's just a little behind. So we're hoping his injury is not too bad. But if you're seeing the scroll at the bottom of my screen, you see that the Marlins are potentially going into 2024 with Sandy Alcantara injured, Braxton Garrett on the IL, Eury Perez potentially out for the season, and aforementioned Eddie Cabrera is out right now with some tightness of his own. The MRI on him, good news, not really a bad injury. Nothing was shown. It was negative. However, it showed inflammation, so he's going to be shut down for a little bit here. Of course, that's good news that he's not going to require surgery. But in 2023, Edward Cabrera missed a month with the potential injury he has now. Horrible news, let's just say that, to start this season. If you think about, again, where we were coming into spring, having 87% of the Miami Marlins team coming back from last year, you weren't going to have Sandy Alcantara. He was part of that 13% not coming back. Now that with all these injuries to the pitchers, that's dropping to like 80%. And your starting rotation is in shambles. You still have Jesus Luzardo, who you hope can stay healthy again for a full season and doesn't put too much pressure on himself now that he's really the only healthy starter from last season coming back. You hope that Trevor Rogers, who's velo, as again Fish on First reported, I was at the spring training game on Saturday, March 16th, yesterday, Stone Cold 316 day. I was there with the wife. It was super hot. She hates the sun. We had to leave after a couple innings. But what we saw was Trevor Rogers, his velo, hitting like 90, 92-ish, and that is his worst ever spring velo. So I hope he's not having a reoccurring injury again to him. He has to come back this year strong. He's lost all his trade value for the most part. Yes, he was an all-star in 2021. He had a great spring in 2021. I was at most of the spring training games that year in West Palm, because that's closer to the house. Didn't have to go to Jupiter, as they were there like almost every day, switching back and forth, as they were only playing the Nationals or the Astros for the most part in that crazy spring. And you had Trevor Rogers do really well then. And so far this spring, he looked really good. Unfortunately, yesterday he didn't, and he got shelled on a couple home runs from the Philadelphia Phillies. Again, it's spring, it's okay, it doesn't really matter, but you look to ramp them up, and his velo was down. You look for Eddie Cabrera to do well. He's starting off on the IL. Same with Braxton Garrett. So who do you have left other than Jesus Luzardo and Trevor Rogers as a 1-2? Well, you got to look now at A.J. Puck. A.J. Puck, they're building back to be a starter. He never started a game in Major League Baseball. Apparently, he was a starting pitcher in college. Before he was traded to Miami in 2023 for J.J. Bleday, the Oakland Athletics were going to start, or were building him back up to be a starter. However, he came to Miami and was the closer for the majority of the season before losing the role to the traded for David Robertson and ultimately Tanner Scott, who also is not having a great spring. He actually got through his first full inning yesterday, so that was a good sign. But staying on A.J. Puck here, he's had a great spring up to one of his last starts. He was leading the league with an 8-point whatever innings. He had thrown 15 strikeouts. So A.J. Puck is a potential fourth guy now in this built rotation of how they're going to put it together. You also have Ryan Weathers. He started 12 games, as reported by Craig Mish yesterday. He started 12 games for the Padres and the Marlins in the regular season for the National League. Ryan Weathers got beat up a lot last season in the major leagues, even a little bit in the minor league camps. So can you trust Ryan Weathers? He's had a decent spring. His last start wasn't the greatest, but again, it's just that it's spring, so you don't take too much into that. So right now, again, we're building up, right? You have Jesus Luzardo, Trevor Rogers, AJ Puck, Ryan Weathers. Well, who becomes your fifth starter now? Because, yes, you had all this depth when the other 3 or 4 pitchers were healthy, but now you're going into this season with 4 of your starting rotation out. Sandy, you knew was going to be out. So who gets the fifth start there? Is it going to be Max Meyer? Max Meyer, however you want to pronounce it, Max was already set to start as a starter in AAA for the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. The plan was to build him back as he was injured in 2022, missed all of 2023 with Tommy John surgery. If you think about how many innings he pitched in the majors, I believe it was like 6 total innings that he pitched in the majors. If that, I was at his first start. It was a Saturday night. He went like 4 1/3, 4 2/3 innings. He didn't make it to 5 as he started getting shelled. I think he gave up 5 or 6 runs in that inning. And then he came back in Pittsburgh at PNC 5 days later for his second start, or 6 days later for his second start, and lasted like 1 inning and maybe a third before coming out with what would be his elbow injury and needing Tommy John, missing all of 2023. So the plan was, yes, he would be as like a backup, as someone who would come in later in the season. You build him back up in AAA, like give his confidence back, and then bring him back to the majors. But now you need a fifth starter if you're the Miami Marlins. And if you're keeping it in-house, well, he has to be one that's up there. There's also talk of George Soriano. They've been building him up as the long guy in the bullpen. Can he be the fifth starter, like an emergency starter, or will it be a bullpen game as a fifth starter? A lot more questions now are being asked. We reviewed this a little bit on the last episode of the #LetsGetLouder LMS podcast, where I said there's a little bit more question marks, and I was going to go review this on the next episode later this week, this being an emergency episode, a shorter episode, where we're just talking about the pitching. So you had more question marks coming into this season than you did coming into the spring. And a lot of those question marks are now firm answers of what you don't want to hear. And that's Sandy's out. Edwards missing some time. Brax is missing some time. And now Eury Perez, the baby goat, the guy that's going to take this franchise into the next millennium, the guy who fans were saying, you must extend already based off his very short time, his cup of coffee in the major leagues in 2023. But even those talks now get placed on hold, because do you still extend the man even though he's going to have Tommy John? He's really young. He's not even 21 yet. I guess the kid's 20 years old. He has a lot of time left. But that's a question you got to ask yourself. If you're a franchise that never extends players, are you going to extend a guy that might need Tommy John? Again, we're speculating here. I'm speculating, but whenever you hear elbow, you hear Tommy John. I said the same thing when Sandy Alcantara went down and had to visit the specialist last year. They weren't announcing Tommy John, but he needed ultimately to have Tommy John in late September, early October, and Sandy's missing all of 2023. He may never pitch for the Marlins again. That's for a later podcast next year, because he's going to make $9.5 million not playing this year. In 2025, he's going to boost that to $17.5 million, and the Marlins have never paid a pitcher $17.5 million, and that's only a skyrocket from there to, I think, $24 million in 2026. So that's another conversation for later. It's a team-friendly deal they got with Sandy, but those team-friendly deals are about to balloon, and the problem with that is this franchise doesn't spend that type of money on single players, and Peter Bendix, coming from the Rays organization, does not spend that type of money. conversation from down the road, but just putting it out there in your minds, Sandy may be done as a Miami Marlin. You can kind of see that, the writing on the wall. But we're not talking about 2025. We're talking about 2024. That's where we are now. And right now, it does not look good for our Marlins as Eury Perez is now being shelved. So where do they go from here? Again, we talked about Max. We talked about Puck. We talked about Ryan Weathers. We've talked about Soriano. But in reality, they need to bring a pitcher into camp. They need to bring a proven starter. I didn't mention Devin Smeltzer. Smeltzer had a no-hitter in AAA last year. In the majors, he was up and down, up and down. Didn't have the best numbers when he was up, but he's a potential start filler as well in a bullpen game, or if he could get past the lineup 2 or 3 times, the opposing lineup. But in reality, the Marlins need to bring someone in. They need to bring a proven pitcher in. They made the move to get some non-roster invites into camp, some young pitching. I think one of them was either with the Nationals or Reds. We'll see if that guy comes up. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But really, they need to bring in a proven pitcher to solidify this roster. And this pitching rotation. And I'm not talking about a guy like Johnny Cueto, who was a bust, and they're paying not to play for the Marlins. I'm talking about them having to bring in someone who's ready to pitch or get ramped up to pitch. And there's a couple names out there. They're not going to bring in Blake Snell. Blake Snell is going to require $30 million a year. As we just discussed, or I just discussed, they're not going to pay Sandy $17.5 potentially in 2025, let alone 26, 24. Why would they sign Blake Snell either to a long-term deal or maybe even offer a 1-year, $30 million contract as he's not getting what he wants? So I don't see them doing that, so I'm crossing Blake Snell off that list. There's Montgomery, the former St. Louis Cardinal pitcher, recently with the World Series champions and had an amazing postseason with the Texas Rangers last year. Montgomery's a sought-after free agent pitcher. He's just asking and commanding more money. Another Scott Boras client, just like Snell, who has not signed with anybody because he's asking more than he's worth, and the major league owners aren't budging with the way TV contracts are right now, with the Bally Sports going down. They're just not giving the type of money that Scott Boras is trying to demand, so there's going to have to be some budge here. He's available. He's a guy the Marlins probably try to trade for at the end of the spring training, the deadline last year in 2023. He ended up going to the Rangers, winning the World Series again, had a great postseason. Montgomery's a name I would look at. There's names out there that are being thrown around like Michael Lorenzen. Lorenzen, who was decent with Detroit. He got traded to the Philadelphia Phillies for their second half run. He was not good in the playoffs. He was not good in the second half of the regular season, except for one game, which was a no-hitter for the Philadelphia faithful. So he did have a no-hitter last year. However, at the end of it, he just wasn't that good, and he's not going to command that much money. The other name out there is Trevor Bauer, and I'm going to spend 3 minutes here. Look, I'm 150,000% against abuse of any type in a relationship, in any, there should never be physical altercations between a husband and wife, a girlfriend, boyfriend, a sex partner, anything like that. It should not happen. It is wrong. With that being said, Trevor Bauer has some baggage with him. What was true or not true, we don't know. All we know is he was never arrested for sexual battery. He was never arrested for abuse of any type. He was never arrested for the allegations against him. He was sued by a potential victim who, again, the lawsuits were thrown out. He sued her back, saying defamation. Lawsuits were thrown out. It looked like a potential setup of this woman claiming abuse, but she kind of, in her own text messages with her friends, set him up to extort him. Don't know what happened. All I can say is what has been found, what has been dropped. He has never been arrested. He's being blackballed by Major League Baseball right now. And he has said on the record he would accept the minimum, which is $720,000, the minimum to make it back to the majors and have an incentive-based contract. That's him believing in himself. If I was the Miami Marlins, I would take a look at it. And I'm getting beaten up a little bit on Twitter here because of my thought on Trevor Bauer. Many are saying, oh, it's a PR nightmare, a public relations nightmare. He's not good in the clubhouse. He's going to ruin the player camaraderie. Look, I read, I looked it up. Has he had issues in the dugout? Has he had issues in the clubhouse? Here and there. He's fiery. He wants to win. He's competitive. Milky Betts, who is a Dodgers all-star, has spoken highly of him. Former pitchers who have pitched with him in that pitching room and have had one-on-one discussions with him, daily interactions, has said he's not a locker room cancer, as it has been reported. The media could swing things one way or the other. Trevor Bauer is a pitcher, a viable arm that is kind of being blackballed right now for what I just spoke about. Never been proven. He's never been arrested. And I'm not going to shame a guy, nor am I going to shame the potential victim. But I'm not going to shame a guy who has never been arrested and the lawsuits against him have been dropped for these allegations. If he could pitch and he could help your team win, bring him in. The Marlins need it. As for the PR side of it, let's be realistic with ourselves here. I'm a huge fan. I know many huge fans. We're already locked into season tickets. We are Marlins members. The rest of Miami, who doesn't come out, even though we were winning last year for the most part, the fans that talk a lot on social media but don't actually show up to the games, they may be upset. But you're not losing them because they don't show up anyway. And winning cures all. You've seen it in the NFL. You've seen it in Major League Baseball with men who have actually been arrested, arraigned, charged. Cases have been dismissed because their significant others or wives refuse to testify against them or press charges. Abuse happens, and players continue to play. Marcell Ozuna, very publicly, got in a fight with his wife, was arrested. He was suspended. He came back. A couple home runs later, you're not talking about Marcell Ozuna, right or wrong. They're just not, it's not an issue anymore. Same thing for a lot of the guys in the NFL. At the end of the day, if you're producing on the field, the other narratives don't matter. If you're producing on the field and your team is winning, to a fan, that at the end of the day is all that matters. Taking all the baggage and everything else out. And by bringing in Trevor Bauer, if he wins, the first couple games, you're going to have a lot of media. You're going to have potential Trevor Bauer starting. What are the Marlins doing? Blah, blah, blah. Everybody arguing. First take, etc. We'll see what happens. At the end of it, if he starts winning, nothing else matters in the realm of baseball. If he's ever charged, convicted, if a lawsuit ever settles or goes through, and it's proven that he actually physically abused somebody, that's a totally different story. Get his ass out of here. But until then, you're in this country, in the way of the law, you're innocent until proven guilty. He's never been arrested, never been charged. That's that. Marlins have to bring in somebody. They have to, whether it's one of those names I've mentioned. No doubt their chief selves are going right now through the Rolodex, looking at potential pitchers who have played before, older guys who don't have a job right now, guys who are in AAA or signed a non-roster invite with other teams that they didn't bring into camp. They are going through potential trades. Marlins brass knows they are in trouble because they didn't do much for the hitting side. We went over that on the last episode. I recommend listening to it. We discussed JD Martinez and other potential players coming in. Not for this pod, but they are now doing the same for the pitchers because they know they want to be cheap, and they know they have to bring in somebody to help this team out, to solidify that rotation. I don't care how much depth you are. None of these guys are proven. None of these guys, like Trevor Rogers, for example, has not thrown a full season in 4 years since his 2021 campaign. That wasn't even a full season as he came out with back injuries at the end of it. The Marlins need help. They need to bring in a veteran pitcher who's young enough, who can help this team win games and can go 5 or 6 innings per game to allow the bullpen, which is going to be a good bullpen, to come in and do their job. Well, those are my thoughts. This has been the LMF hashtag Let's Get Louder podcast. I hope you've enjoyed, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on the podcasting platforms, the Apples, the Spotifys, the Googles, even though it's going away. Thank you for listening. Please go to social media right now at Loud Miami Fan. Please follow me. Also, you can go to at LMF Podcast. That is the official Podcast X account. I'd love for you to follow that too. Please rate 5 stars if you're listening on a pod. Give me a comment. Go subscribe on the YouTube channel. Love y'all for being here. I don't make money from doing this. Remember that. Until I boost it up and get listeners and whatnot, this is all free. I'm actually paying now to broadcast these out to you. So I hope you've enjoyed. This has been the hashtag Let's Get Louder LMF's podcast. Let's go, Marlins. Let's get louder. Let's frickin' go.